Hello and welcome to this presentation about reading from data sources, CSV. I've actually made different presentations for CSV, XML and JSON because I think that it's too much for one presentation. Now the study design explicitly mentions reading, but I've covered reading and writing. So students can explain how to get data from a CSV file and how to write to a CSV file. So what is a CSV file? Well, as you can see in the picture here, there are separate values. There are values there, and the computer knows that they belong in separate buckets because there's a comma in between them. So it is literally a comma separated values. So the computer can tell that there are 4 values there. The story does not remain that simple, but that's okay. It's a plain text format. It's used to store tabular data. The tab key, which we now use to kind of go out one, and we use it to indent our code, used to actually be how you created tables when you were using typewriters back in the dim dark ages. And so that's what we mean by tabular format. Basically, it's in columns. And the values are separated by delimiters, typically commas, although we're going to come back and talk about that some more. So, some of the formats and conventions. Well, each line in the file represents one record. So Alice 17, Sydney enjoys coding, reading, all belongs in, is one record, all about Alice. I guess it's a very simple form of database, although I'm reluctant to use the word database in this context, but that's what it is. The fields or the columns are separated by delimiter, which we've talked about, and the first row often contains column headers, but it doesn't have to. If you're writing this for your own purposes, it's probably good practice to have the first row, but then you have to ignore that first row as a data set because it doesn't contain the data, it contains the column names. So it's optional. And lines terminated with a new line character. Now you often can't see the new line character, but where you can have a visible one, which is \n. At least I hope that's right. I'm pretty sure it's / and not /, but if I'm wrong, you can work it out. So, in terms of the delimiters, while commas are the standard, hence CSV, you can have a CSV separated by other things and it's still a CSV. So the comma is the most common. Semicolons are common in European countries. /t, which is tab separated values, and the pipe, which is next to the brackets on your keyboard. For me, it's shift and the key, actually the / key, can be used when the data contains many commas. All of these are valid and have their uses. Now, it is pretty easy to read and write from them. I'm only going to be talking about Python today. You can also do it in JavaScript. You can also do it in PHP. You can do it in pretty much any language. It's very straightforward technically. I'm not going to unpack it in the 3 languages. I'm just going to be talking about it. And in fact, in this video, I'm not going to be explaining the code in person. This video is intended to be more conceptual. There are some fantastic resources for finding the code, and I'm not going to compete with them. So, if we're reading in Python, we import this library called CSV. That's just a comment saying we're reading CSV. We say with open and then we name the file. Now the file must be in the same directory as our Python file. So it's got to be sort of sitting next to it, can't be squirreled away in some other directory. The R means that we're reading it. If we want to write it, that's a W. And there's another one for when I think we can write when one doesn't exist, and we can write to one that already does exist. Again, this is stuff to look at as you're actually implementing it. We're creating this thing called a reader, this object, which is calling the CSV library and creating this thing using a part of it called reader. So it's slightly confusing that we're using reader and it's got its own thing called reader, and we're calling that file. So there's this object called file, and it's saying, hey, let's look at this with the bit of CSV called reader, and we're going to call that object reader. Then we are iterating through the lines in reader, which is our object that has all of that data, and we're printing the row. So we will see a whole lot of values, including their commas. It'll print the whole row. You could go through and call them by their, goodness, I've gone a little bit blank, by their index? Yeah, by their index. So you can do that if you want to pull out specific values. Now you can write very easily as well. So again, we're going to import the same library. We're going to open, we're saying the name of the file, and we're specifying how the new line works. That looks like a double talking mark. It's actually two single talking marks. So we're creating this thing called file. We're using writer as this object to write to the part of CSV called writer with file. If this is confusing, that's okay. It is the first few times. And now we're going to say writer, which is the object, write now, which is a function from CSV, and we're writing the information. So we're writing a heading, and then we're writing an entry. So once you've got the object open and you're working with it, you can just keep writing to it. So what are some advantages of CSV? It is human readable and editable in text editors, so it's very, very low tech. And you can read it. Now, really big ones with a lot of columns that aren't necessarily going to line up because they're going to have values of different lengths. Yes, you can read them. You might end up with quite a headache doing it. They say universally supported across applications and programming languages. I think that's probably true. It's very widely supported. It's got quite small file size compared to other formats. It's certainly much smaller than XML, and it's very easy to generate and parse, which just means to read and understand. There are limitations, of course. There is no standard specification. There's RFC 4180, but it's not universally followed. It cannot represent hierarchies or complex data structures, so it is just basically representing a table. There's no data type. Everything you read in it is text, so you're going to have to convert it. If you know that, column 2 is 10, it's going to come in as text and you're going to have to convert it to an integer if that's important. And the handling of special characters varies between implementations, and having commas in your values is where life starts to get complicated, and then having talking marks within your values is where it gets further complicated. There are workarounds for all of this. I'm not saying it can't be done, but life can get complicated. So what I do want to point you to is that the wiki page, which should be reading, does have more information than I presented to you here. It does have some JavaScript for you. It does have some PHP, but the internet is lousy with this stuff. You don't need to rely on that. By all means, go and use it, but there is heaps and heaps of information. This is such a widespread format. So let's look at what we do know, and we're going to do some true and false questions. CSV files can only use commas as delimiters and cannot use other characters such as semicolons or tabs. Well, that's not true. It is called a CSV, but you can use those other things. In CSV format, if the text field contains a comma, the entire field must be enclosed in double quotes. I didn't tell you the answer to this, but in actual fact it's true. CSV files are capable of representing hierarchical and nested data structures just as effectively as JSON or XML. I did talk about this, not by a long shot. The first row of a CSV file must always contain column headers. It is a mandatory requirement for the CSV format. That's false on a couple of counts. There is a standard, but the standard is not universally followed, and you don't have to do it. You can do it. I don't even know that I'd go so far as to say it's good practice, but it's certainly not a bad idea. When a double quote character appears within a CSV field that is already enclosed in quotes, okay, double quotes within quotes, it should be escaped by using two consecutive double quotes. That's really off in the weeds, and the answer is yes, that is true. CSV files are larger in size compared to binary formats like Excel spreadsheets because they store data as plain text. Now, I think this is somewhat of a tricky question. It's smaller than something like XML because there isn't all that supporting stuff about showing the structure of it, but it is not as efficient as something like a Excel spreadsheet. So the answer to that is true. It is in fact larger. Now, before we finish up, there's a bit of history. I don't often do history in these, but I was kind of interested. Who invented it? Where did it come from? Well, it first pops up in the 1970s, but there's no specific date that I could find. The term CSV itself was first used in 1983 and quickly gained popularity, and serious standardization efforts began in 2005, so that's only 21 years ago, with the RFC 4180. So there you go. Now, hopefully you're a little bit more informed. As I said, this isn't meant to be an effort to fully document how you do it. It's just meant to give you a conceptual overview. But I would go and get myself a CSV file from somewhere in the, like Mockaroo. It's a really good source of mock data, and build a program to install some data, to import some data, and maybe even try writing some data to a small data set, because I think it's the sort of thing you get the hang of by doing.